Well, good morning, Risers, and happy Thursday. We've got another big show planned for everyone today. What have we got on the docket, Ryan?
We've got all-star panelists Will Jawando and Amy Tarkanian. They will weigh in on the Texas Dems who have contracted COVID. Drew Holden discusses the media's coverage of the Fauci-Rand Paul gain-of-function dispute. And my Intercept colleague, Trevor Aronson, is going to break down the FBI's involvement in the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. Whitmer, that's a good one.
It's not bad. You should give that
How am I the first one to come up with that?
You should give that to the Twitter trolls.
They can have that.
Yeah.
That one's for you. Okay.
You're a generous man, Ryan Grim.
You got it.
Well, first, we actually wanted to discuss the ongoing feud. This fight is going on between the Democrats and the Republican Party. It exploded yesterday over the January 6th commission. Just yesterday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pulled all of the Republican picks from the January 6th committee in response to Nancy Pelosi's rejection of Jim Banks and Jim Jordan. In a statement, Pelosi said, quote, "With respect for the integrity of the investigation, with an insistence on the truth, and with concern about statements made and actions taken by these members, I must reject the recommendations of Representatives Banks and Jordan to the Select Committee. The unprecedented nature of January 6th demands this unprecedented decision." McCarthy accused Pelosi of playing politics. Okay. Nancy Pelosi, in that context, sanctimoniously waxing superior about facts and truth is incredible because freaking Adam Schiff is on this commission. Yeah. Like, it's unbelievable. What did you make of this?
I mean, right. Nobody wants to hear from her. She's not the messenger. Also, nobody wants to hear Kevin McCarthy say that he's shocked to see politics being played in the House of Representatives. Yeah. Just absolutely shocked. I'm also in the camp of having no sympathy for Republicans in this situation when Democrats caved on every single question about the creation of the commission. Staff 50-50, the commission 50-50. Republicans can pick their own members to be on the commission. And speaking of politics, it became untenable, it feels like, for Republicans in the Senate for 10 Republicans in the Senate to support creating this commission. And so what that means is that Democrats then get to create their own commission. So it's like, I'm curious for your take on this. To me, if Republicans actually care about the structure of the committee or the commission, the time to care about that was when they were negotiating the structure of it, instead of walking away from it at the last minute and then allowing Democrats unilateral authority to just set up their own.
Well, here's where it gets pathetic. I think the reason Republicans were objecting during that process is because they could sense, and again, this is not isolated to Democrats, but they could sense that this was going to be politicized to the point where they wouldn't want to have the involvement of people like Jim Jordan or Jim Banks. And I don't know if those are the particular names that people would have thought of, but they knew that it was coming to this. And it's all like, it's theater at this point. Like, both sides know that it's always coming to this. We're seeing this happening with the infrastructure bill right now. Like, things are so fraught, so divided that there's this awareness. I'd be curious to hear what Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy are talking about behind the scenes, because it seems to me that there's this increasing awareness that there's just nothing that can get done on a bipartisan basis right now because there's too many reasons for it to get killed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this was always going to be politicized because it was, at its heart, it was a political event. And there are kind of two ways that the country, I think, kind of could have gone out of this, but there's really only one way. One would be post 9/11. There was this just weird glow around American politics where George Bush climbed to like a 91% approval rating or something like that. Everyone, where I live, the Baltimore Sun had sent out, and newspapers across the country did this, included in the newspaper, which everybody used to get, this like printout of the American flag, and everybody put the American flag in their window. Everywhere you look, there was this newspaper printout of the American flag. Because it was on newsprint, like a month later, it was all yellow and wrinkled, which was also a nice metaphor for how things had curdled. But so you could have had a moment like that where both parties in Congress, not necessarily in the public, but in Congress, were like, whoa, this was crazy.
Yeah.
Like, let's try to not have this happen again. Let's figure out how did this happen, and let's try to make sure it doesn't happen again. But immediately after before they had even mopped up the blood, the Republicans continued voting, to contest the election, and Democrats were making partisan gain out of it.
Yeah.
I think the former's worse than the latter, given what had happened that day. But it was very clear that it was not going to be a kumbaya moment, and so here we are.
Right, here we are. And I think you're right to point out it did feel like there was this moment that was pregnant with the potential for kumbaya moment.
And then Ted Cruz stands up to be recognized and just gives the same speech he'd written before about Arizona electors or whatever it was. It's like, you're not even going to add in a line about what just happened right here?
There were some, that's the other thing, is there actually were some really poignant, I think, moments that we heard.
Lindsey Graham gave a good speech.
Lindsey Graham. There were some really poignant moments that we heard, especially from the reporting about what was happening in the Capitol, and people started helping each other out and all of that. And it was like, okay, so are we going in that direction or are we going in this direction?
Right.
And it went in the other direction, obviously. This is not, of course, this is not on the same scale as 9/11, even though you have Never Trump pundits like Steve Schmidt saying that
it's worse.
Worse than 9/11. Worse than 9/11. Speaking of those parallels, here's Speaker McCarthy discussing what a 9/11 style commission means to the GOP. Let's take a look at that.
When we had a 9/11 commission, they didn't look at just what happened on 9/11. They looked at what built up to 9/11. That's what we requested. Let's understand what built up through the summer when the riots were going on and the National Guard were there and Nancy Pelosi was criticizing because they were at the Lincoln Memorial protecting it.
That has nothing to do with this. It just has nothing to do with this. I understand what he's saying, but what we need more facts on, and maybe he's trying to get at this, is what was happening. We already know a lot, actually, of what was happening with law enforcement, what directions they were given, why they were not prepared. And again, I was there covering this, and you could see the lack of preparation almost immediately as the people who had marched down Constitution Avenue had started to come up to the Capitol grounds. You could see immediately that this was going to be really bad, that the police line was not holding, and that there was a lot of confusion and chaos. And so the questions, which we are already getting a lot of answers to, what happened there? I don't see how. There were protests in this city last year, and those are also protests that I covered. There were riots in this city last year. Those are a separate thing. They did not get, I think, due attention in the press, and I understand why Republicans get frustrated by that, but I don't see the point in trying to bridge that gap at all.
Yeah, and if McCarthy wanted to explore that, and he wants to ask National Guard, DC Police, whether or not there was some connection between criticism over the National Guard being at some protests around the country and their delay in getting the National Guard out and their inability to be prepared. Everybody knew that this was happening. Yeah. And then they just had the regular shift people with the regular equipment outside of the Capitol. So if he wants to ask them that question, that a January 6th commission would be the forum to do that, and there would be nothing stopping him, from raising those questions. And I actually think I think you're probably right, but I think it's a fine question to ask. Did the politics around the National Guard, where didn't somebody get fired from the New York Times for running a Tom Cotton ad saying that we ought to send the National Guard
James
to
Bennett.
these protests? Mm-hmm. And then you have Democrats saying, why wasn't the National Guard? Okay, fine. You want to talk about that? Talk about that. But come show up for the commission. Yeah,
and that's why, again, this is at the end of the day so pathetic, because when we can ask and answer these questions in the transparent forum where you see what's being asked and you see how people are responding to that under oath, perhaps, that's a really beneficial process, even if, we can sit back right here and be like, well, I don't know what direction that question is going to go in now. Actually, to see it play out in the forum of hearings is generally a helpful thing, especially when people are under oath and the information is, critical to preventing something similar happening in the future. So I totally understand. I don't disagree that it's not a valid question. I just don't like the messaging of trying to it's a great example again. Yeah. It's we're just playing this circular game, right? Where it's it never ends. It never ends. There's always something that you can keep shifting the blame towards. And again, having watched this covering it. The fact that we are in July right now and any semblance of seriousness about the whatever committee or commission would tackle this has all but dissolved because it's being totally exploited for political purposes. It's just like, it's a statement on where we are right now.
It really is. Yeah. The inability to even form the commission is just a perfect metaphor for where our politics are at this point. Yeah. And so, I think like what people need to do is recognize that that's where the politics are, and then chart their course from there. Like that, this is where we are. We cannot as a Congress put together a commission to study what happened on January 6th and what led up to it. Okay, so then what? Where do we go from there? And those are the questions to explore, rather than trying to stitch together some artificial pretense of comedy that just doesn't exist anymore.
And what's so frustrating from the conservative perspective is that people like Steve Schmidt will go on MSNBC and say this was worse than 9/11, and then Nancy Pelosi will be feted and treated as though she is some sort of like bipartisan hero for taking Jordan and Banks off of this, and Jordan and Banks will get sort of smeared and run through the mud in the legacy press. And then for people like Kevin McCarthy, the answer is, well, how do we respond to that? What is the messaging? What is the way to actually post-Trump sort of go on offense in the way that signals you're not taking the nonsense from the sort of establishment Democrats and the establishment legacy media anymore? And then you get at this impasse because it's like, what do you do? Republicans want to punch back. They want to go on offense. And it's an understandable impulse because the entire political establishment is normalizing or legitimizing the Democratic talking points. And so it creates this really unfortunate back and forth.
Right. Yeah, and it's just, I do understand why, so Liz Cheney, who is a despicable person on so many different levels, rightly on January 6th, has been reported, Jim Jordan is being chivalrous and saying, I'll be in the aisle here and I'll protect people, and she's like, "F you, Jim! You did this.
Yeah.
This is your fault."
Yep.
And Kevin McCarthy screaming at Donald Trump on the phone, telling Donald Trump, "This is your fault. You did this. Call these dogs off." To then have McCarthy do a complete 180 when that was his feeling in the moment does feel disingenuous. You're like, how useful would it be to have these folks on the commission? Yeah,
nobody's been able to reckon with this meaningfully, I think. It's really sad. It's actually really sad when you think about it, because in that moment, McCarthy is reportedly having that conversation with then-President Trump. There was something really, watching this on the right, there was something really, I think, I was almost optimistic for a moment that's like, okay, so we can perhaps deal with the fringe, right? We can now have a conversation about why there seems to be this growing fringe and what we can do about it. There's a lot of socioeconomic factors that are coming into this. Let's talk about it. And let's do something about it. And it never happened.
Yeah, and Trump never blinked. Mm-hmm. What did he tell Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, he never blinked.
He said, Kevin, seems like these people care more about winning the election than you do.
Yeah.
And that was the choice for the Republicans at that point. Do you follow Kevin McCarthy's lead there, or do you follow Donald Trump's lead? And what did Kevin McCarthy do? Whoop.
Yeah.
Right with Trump.
Yeah. And again, it gets to this really unfortunate circular situation where the reason Trump reacts that way and the reason his base wants him to react that way is because you immediately had the legacy media latching on to this and exploiting a tragedy for partisan purposes, for ideological purposes, and in a way that was detached from reality. We talked last week about Megyn Kelly getting all of this backlash for a tweet in which she said January 6th had been overplayed by the media. And it's like, yes, two things can be true. This can be a horrific tragedy, and the media can be exploiting it and overplaying it. Both of those things can be true. And so that's what creates this dilemma for Republicans, because they feel this impulse to go on offense, to punch back, and then it gets us into this situation that we've just had a conversation about here.
There we go. And we'll tell you what's on our radars up next.